Welcome, health enthusiasts. You're tuned into Health Unabashed on Healthcare Now Radio, your one-stop shop for all things health, wellness, and innovation. We're here to shake up the status quo in health, making it sustainable, equitable, and oh so patient-centric. I'm Greg Masters, your co-host and executive producer, and I'm joined by the digital health aficionado himself, author, thought leader, and might I add, in his executive role, steward servant, Gil Bash. Together, we're on a mission to bring you the people, the ideas, and the companies that are not just talking the talk, but walking the walk. On today's menu, Gil chats with Dr. Narinder Bhalla, Senior Vice President, Worldwide Medical and Head of Cardiovascular and Established Brands for Bristol Myers Squibb, a global biopharmaceutical company whose mission is to discover, develop, and deliver innovative medicines that help patients prevail over serious disease. And Jayme Strauss, RN, MSN, MBA, the Chief Clinical Officer at Viz.ai, the leading AI care coordination platform for disease detection and workflow optimization. So with no further delay, Gil, the mic is yours.
Greg, once again, I want to thank you so very much for the gracious introduction. This show is really made possible thanks to your magic and your commitment to public health. And I just want to remind our listeners that Greg and Fred Goldstein have an incredible show on Healthcare Now Radio, Pop Health Week. It's an important show, more important than ever, because I've always believed that we really have to focus on everyone's health in order to really address public health. And often the people who are most in need get the least amount of attention. So I always appreciate, Greg, that you and Fred are raising these issues, and really speaks to the program we have today. We have two incredible guests, and I'm very excited about introducing them. Jayme Strauss, who's the Chief Clinical Officer of Viz.ai. This is a very important company working in the area of augmented intelligence. I'm not a big fan of the other AI. I'll send it artificial intelligence. I don't think intelligence can be artificial. It's augmented by intelligence that we look at en masse. And Viz.ai really has been, I think, one of the key companies out there that is practically making a difference right now by taking a look at cardiovascular disease. And we have with Jayme an incredible guest. We have with us today Dr. Narinder Bhalla, Head of Cardiovascular and Established Brands at Bristol Myers Squibb. He's been both on the patient care side, he's been on the industry side. He's an innovator. He has a deep appreciation for technology and the role of technology in clinical care. And these two leaders have done something that we talk about often, but we don't see enough of: collaborate. And I really want to talk about the fact today when clinical advances, treatments for patients, and technology find harmony, the possibility of bringing care closer to the patient becomes a reality. So, Nani, Jayme, welcome to the program today. It's a thrill to have you. And I want to kick off immediately with a question for both of you, a little bit about, if I understand correctly, the genesis of this relationship was not one knocking on the door of the other, but rather someone in the know in the industry saying to you both, I think the both of you should sit down at the table. I think that 1 + 1 is definitely going to equal 4 when it comes to the possibility of taking a look at a patient community that is underserved. Is that right, Nani? I mean, you're sitting there from the perspective of, the cardiologist, person who's overseeing a tremendous amount of clinical work from one of the world's leading pharmaceutical companies. Did you see the potential of the two of you getting together?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that when we are looking at certain cardiovascular issues, and particularly in this case, where our relationship started was more on a cardiomyopathy side with hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, recognizing that this is a disease that has a reasonable prevalence. It's a rare disease. It's it's the most common genetic cardiac disorder. And when we start thinking about that disease, what we start to recognize is that it's not diagnosed as much as it should be, and as quickly and as early as it should be. It's a progressive disease. And then the question is, well, are there mechanisms and things that you can put into play that actually allow us to diagnose this disease sooner and earlier? And that's where, we felt that technology could help. And it's pretty much out of that thinking that the relationship was born.
It's so important to hear that. And Jayme, I was recently at the meeting Health Without Vowels and was being interviewed about my sort of takeaways of health. And I said, I thought the big shift with AI was the focus suddenly on the practical. And in this relationship, from what I've been able to determine from studying the background between VisAI and BMS, this is a very practical, life sustaining engagement. I mean, you're looking at people as Dr. Bhalla Nani said, cardiomyopathy is considered a rare disease. If I understand correctly, and you'll both correct me if I'm not on target, about 85% of the patient population goes undiagnosed to a tipping point where obviously it's so evident that we have a problem that finally they get into the sort of the treatment pipeline. Can you share with us a little bit about the vision of AI, not as a concept, but actually AI doing some practical work to improve lives?
Yeah, I think, when we talk about this disease, it is a rare disease, and there is even discrepancy in the literature about what the actual prevalence is. So the goal for us at Viz is really tackling how do we find patients in various communities to help bring care to these patients and to the appropriate specialists to help support them.
That's great to know. And by the way, for our listeners today, Jayme is dialing in from an airport. I don't know what airport. What airport are you calling in from, Jayme?
I'm in Newark. I'm trying to eliminate as much background noise as possible.
That's cool. That's cool. One of my favorite airports. As a matter of fact, just for people who are listening in, people often say to me, "Where's my office?" And I say, wherever there's a Newark a United hub, that's usually where you'll find me, in some United club around the world. So I'm here in my studio today, Jayme, and you're taking the lead at some place in Newark Airport. So thank you for replacing me today, so I can be home. I want to thank you. Nani, I want to get back to this core issue of the relationship. You have a technology background. I mean, obviously, you're a very skilled, noted cardiologist. We know that you've had some amazing mentors in your career because we talked about them before the show. You have an appreciation for the role technology can play in medicine. And I do know that physicians get very little training in technology. It's sort of on the fly. You had a bolus injection of understanding the role technology could play through your work in industry, early industry, entrepreneurial industry. I would love to get your impression, because often companies in the technology side, like VisAI, they knock on the door and the door isn't answered. You not only saw the potential, but you welcomed them in and made them a partner in answering a key question. How do we get to people who will present with serious cardiovascular disease? How do we as a company make a commitment to get to them earlier so that we can help? And I'd be curious to get into your thinking about, we need a technology partner here, a data partner who can help make that a reality.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I think that technology comes in all different forms and colors, and you have to really understand which technology will fit well for the purpose that you want to use it for, because it could be different based, it could be an imaging technology for one thing, it could be a VisAI technology that we're using in this case, which is with an EKG. But you're right, I had my exposure to technology very early in my career, but I'll be honest, I think we were out with technology, we were too early in the game. And as a result, we didn't have an audience that we thought we should have. And now I see, literally 25 years later where we are. And it's been huge progress in that way. So in one way, yes, you're right, that many of us don't get that training during our residency, fellowship, et cetera, about how AI or any technology can help us make patient care better, diagnosis better. But having said that, it's come a long ways in the last 2 decades. And some of that is because the technology itself has gotten better. The way we can process information, the amount of information we can process, how quickly we can process, all of that has improved dramatically over the years. But I think in this particular case, we could have gone multiple different ways from a technology perspective. The question was, what can you use from a technological tool perspective that is easy, comprehensive, easy to implement, and get data from? Because you can come up with a great technological solution, but if it's very complex and complicated to implement, it may not get you where you want to go. So one of the things that was advantageous here was to get to a tool that was used in clinical practice on a daily basis. It has great familiarity from people. So the tool is very familiar. Now, the technology behind it may be a black box for many folks, but at least the tool itself is very familiar. They can relate to it. And it's actually interesting to hear some of the comments when people say, wow, I didn't realize that I could put the same information I look at on a daily basis into an engine and actually get something out of it that allows me to move my patient care forward. So I think that's an interesting dynamic here.
It's fascinating to hear that, because I'm stunned by the fact that the majority of this patient community goes under or undiagnosed. And Jayme, I'm just wondering how, if I can get behind the curtain a little bit, many people say, okay, AI, artificial augmented intelligence, I get it. It seems to be a buzzword. When I entered this field, we talked about, way back when, big data. And then we talked about machine learning. And now, of course, we're at a term AI, which has become popularized because of open AI, has brought it into the consumer world. So suddenly this professional world, this consumer world, have found some form of verbal harmony. Could you share with us a little bit of what you, in your role as Chief Clinical Officer at VizAI, what you're doing to collect all this data? Because it still comes down to a lot of data. That's what people would say to me way back when. What's big data? And I said, well, it's a lot of data. So you collect a lot of data, and then machine learning was really pattern recognition of data. So you're doing that, and then you're providing insight in terms of patient types or patients that may actually be at risk for cardiomyopathy. And I see this as a big public health contribution by BMS and VizAI to the community. I think you're changing the whole dynamic of how we'll engage people who may have serious cardiovascular disease. We won't wait till they appear in the ER any longer. We might have the possibility of connecting with them far earlier in the progression stage, when we can do far more for them therapeutically. So I wanted to get the sense of what's the genesis of, how do you get all this data, and behind the scenes, how do you master its analysis?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. And really back to your point of we don't want patients to come into the ED and that be where they get found, right? Because at that point, they're already sick. And we really want to be able to help find patients in the community setting. And that's why we really focused on ECGs as really that top of funnel of where we're screening patients, because all of us probably listening to the show have had an ECG, right? Whether it's for our annual screening, whether you've played sports. So we've really worked to ingest the data, because we have a large install base across some of the biggest health systems across the country, about 1,500 in the biggest IDNs. We already have the foundational data streams and those pipes laid. So we can ingest the data. We pull in the data from all over the health system, whether doesn't matter if you're out in a primary care office or you're in your cardiology office, or you are coming through the ED, we're taking that data, we're analyzing the ECGs, we're scanning them, we're running the modeling. And then even further down in the patient journey, what we're really working to do is do summarization with that, the natural language processing for very specific elements that are coming off of the echo and the EHR to make it a much clearer picture for the clinician to make decisions on what to do with that patient.
Just dropping in, you're right on time for Health Unabashed on Healthcare Now Radio. Today we're chatting with Dr. Narinder Bhalla, Senior Vice President, Worldwide Medical and Head of Cardiovascular and Established Brands, Bristol Myers Squibb, a global pharmaceutical company, and Jayme Strauss, RN, MSN, MBA, the Chief Clinical Officer at Viz.ai, the leading AI care coordination platform for disease detection and workflow optimization. Stay tuned.
That's so insightful. And Nani, I'm wondering if you could go back a few years when you were walking around the halls and in sort of grand rounds and looking at this, because I think one of the things you bring to your role at BMS in cardiology is you also have that bedside experience. You also have the sort of like looking at the flip chart, or also sitting there and looking at ECG reports and sort of looking at the potential of abnormalities. When you think of bringing technology into it, the question I have for you distinctly is, right now through this collaboration, are we reaching a point where health innovators from the biopharmaceutical side and the technology side are actually becoming augmentative channels of public health? So BMS is investing in insight that may change the whole dynamic of how we look at cardiomyopathy. What do we look at the earliest stages? You're going to see patterns through this research, and I'm sure, knowing your company as I do, you'll probably be sharing those patterns. They won't, you'll make sure that everybody can benefit from that. I'd be excited to hear about what you can share, a sense of vision about the fact that by doing this, the BMS community are saying, we feel a responsibility to the cardiovascular community, and patients may be touched by this disease. That's one of the reasons why we're doing it. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Listen, the patient's in the center of all of this. And as we start to think about, the patterns that may, and honestly, I can't tell you all the patterns that might emerge. There might be some really obvious ones that we would say, okay, here are the things, here are the patients that we diagnosed, but for how long did they have the condition before we got this technology to them to be able to actually then establish the diagnosis? So what was the compression that we made in the diagnosis, for example? Because we compressed that time frame into a much shorter time frame. What does that look like? And what does that mean from a patient perspective, from a life perspective, or what they might have done differently? So I think as that data accumulates, we will want to share whatever our lessons and learnings are from those things. And then also just looking at how are you driving action? Because technology, and Jayme and I were together earlier today and just talking about this. So, it's great to be able to use a technology, identify the patient, but someone's still got to take that next step to make sure that patient then moves through the right pathway to get the treatment or or further diagnostic testing, whatever the case might be. They still need to move. So how do you drive action? And I think some of what we learn here, I'm hoping will help drive action as well, not just use a technology to give an answer, but actually drive the action that needs to occur afterwards to have the benefit to the patient at the end of the day.
Just if I could just stay with you one more moment, because people have heard of cardiomyopathy. It's described in many different sort of common consumer terms. But could you share with people what happens when people start to present with cardiomyopathy?
Yeah, and listen, cardiomyopathy I'll just say it's a wide berth, because there are many, many different types of cardiomyopathies. The ones that we are obviously working with Jayme on and Viz AI on is with hypertrophic cardiomyopathy. And cardiomyopathies, unfortunately, even those that may not be necessarily hypertrophic cardiomyopathies, can present with very nonspecific symptoms, or they can be asymptomatic because you may have a genetic predisposition to a cardiomyopathy, but that doesn't mean that you will 100% develop that cardiomyopathy, or at what time in your life will you actually show signs and symptoms of that cardiomyopathy. So it's a little bit unpredictable. It can be asymptomatic. And when you do get the symptoms, they can be very non-specific, shortness of breath, tiredness, chest discomfort, maybe a little bit of palpitations or more palpitations. So you can start to imagine that you can start to go off track to diagnose the known types of things that give you those symptoms. Oh yeah, maybe you have a heart problem with your blood vessels, because that can give you shortness of breath, that can give you chest pain. Well, you're having palpitations, maybe it's this or that. So you can also see how those symptoms can unfortunately lead you into a diagnostic pathway that may not get you to the right diagnosis, because the symptoms can be so non-specific.
That's really challenging.
Yeah,
very challenging.
So that's really the thing here, and then those patients, many of them progress until it becomes debilitating, or that's when someone may take a different action and then make the diagnosis. But then the patient may have progressed to a different stage.
This is so important, and I really sort of feel your clinical history, seeing patients coming out. Obviously, here you are, there's a whiteboard behind you, you're making important decisions to guide a clinical program, but yet you draw on that clinical experience. And Jayme, I'm thinking of you now. You spent a good chunk of your career also on the other side, or the same side as seeing patients. You were in health systems. You were in Piedmont Healthcare in Georgia. You were at Baptist Health in South Florida. I mean, you've spent a lot of years as someone really on the clinical side as well in the hospital system. I'd be curious from your perspective, from both of your perspectives, because you really haven't grown up in industry, you've sort of transitioned into industry. Do you have a better idea of how technology should be applied to improve patient care?
I think that when you live in the clinical world and you kind of can really see where things break down and where there's challenges in how patients receive care and how they move through their journey through a healthcare system, you start identifying where things are kind of fundamentally broken and where technology and tools can solve that, right? Like, we don't have to make it so hard for patients and also for the clinicians that are caring for them. And it's actually how I ended up coming to Viz was because I was a user of Viz, and it completely changed how I ran my stroke alerts as a nurse, as a stroke nurse. And it was so impactful to see how we took a process before and were able to streamline it down, get more patients to the right specialists for care, and really then even show through that patients had better outcomes and went home with less disability. So yes, I think, it is a hard shift when you switch from healthcare to industry, but I think we bring a perspective from what happens in the health system and with patients and how tools and innovation can really solve those challenges.
Yeah, I think this is very unique. So, I'm thinking about your collaboration. I mean, this is very special. Obviously, many companies work with outside enterprises in the technology area. That's nothing new. But I sort of sense that this relationship, because it's so focused around the patient. I think, Nani, you said this so well, that this is an effort that is centered around the patient. How do we help the patient? How do we use the best of science, the best of technology to improve patient care and ensure access to patient care? I wish we had an hour for this show, but Healthcare Now Radio doesn't give that to me. There's another show that bumps right into mine right afterward. But I'd love to get some closing thoughts from you, because I'm kind of overwhelmed with the collaborative spirit that you both exhibit toward each other. And you were both together today. So that really demonstrates that. Nani, how important is it that this relationship between you and Viz AI, how important is it for BMS, you feel, to pursue its fullest potential to sustain and save people's lives?
I think it's very important, and and we are making sure that and more is also, as you learn from this relationship and the outputs from this relationship, how do you use that to make it even stronger and make the next stage better? So I think it's extremely important for us, and we hope that this effort in the end does benefit patients. We've been together for over a year in the relationship, but we are now starting to see where it can lead. So hopefully, next time we come on this show, maybe we can tell you more as to how this has all turned out.
Oh, I would love that. I would love that. Jayme, I follow VizAI. I watch your feed on X, formerly Twitter, and other places. Your company's been very, very committed to clinical science. It's not just iSense a technology company. That's the process. But you've been very busy sharing science in sort of a peer review setting. Is that something that you think is inherent in the VizAI culture? That it is important to show that AI is actually part of the outcome process?
Yeah, it's fundamentally part of our culture and our mission of what we're doing, because I think, there's a lot of AI out there and a lot of notion that you can just put it in and it'll work automatically. And it's not. You really got to get into the workflow, into the patient journey and care coordination. But more importantly, what is the impact that you're making for patients, right? So we've done a lot of patient publications on patient outcomes across all of the disease states that we work in. And we keep that front of mind, as to what do we need to look at that shows impact to patients, but also benefit to clinicians.
Well, I want to thank you both for this. I'm really looking forward to having you both back. I think this is just a game-changing collaborative effort. It's so thrilling to hear when people get together with a sense of, how do I use clinical science? How do I use digital health technologies to potentially get places that I never imagined I would? And the most important place that it seems that you both want to get to is improving patients' lives. Thanks so much for joining us on Health Unabashed.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And that, dear listeners, is the last note for today's melody. A huge thanks to our worldwide listeners for tuning in, and deep gratitude to our special guests, Dr. Narinder Bhalla, Senior Vice President, Worldwide Medical and Head of Cardiovascular and Established Brands at Bristol Myers Squibb, a global pharmaceutical company, and Jayme Strauss, the Chief Clinical Officer at Viz.ai, the leading AI care coordination platform for disease detection and workflow optimization. For more information or to access on-demand replays of our work, go to healthcarenowradio.com and select Health Unabashed from the Programs tab. To keep up with their work, go to www.bms.com and www.viz.ai, respectively. Stay social with Gil and me on Twitter via @Gil_Bash, and that's BASHE, and Greg Masters, MPH, and that's Greg with 2 G's. Don't forget to give your tweets some zing with our hashtag #HealthUnabashed. Until we meet again, pursue your passion for better health and no apologies.